1 second, please. Thank you. I'm Councilwoman Xanthia Oliver. This is our special Public Safety Committee meeting virtually. And first, I would like to take a few moments of silence. Yes, yeah. Okay, I'd like to take a few moments of silence for our former council member who passed away this morning, Rashima Dixon. So we can ballot. Okay, this meeting is now called to order. The Special Public Safety Committee meeting for Friday, September the 16th. I'm the Vice Chair, Councilmember Xanthia Oliver for the 3rd District. At this time, I will call the roll for those members on the committee first. Loretta Walsh is absent. Excuse. Councilwoman Linda Gray.
Present.
Councilman Chris Johnson.
Present.
Council members James Padola. I think he is absent with excuse. Council member Albert Mills.
Present.
And Council member President Trippy Congo. As a friendly reminder, well, this is just a presentation, so we don't have to get into that. This special meeting is to address, excuse me, the special meeting is to address the City Council, the City of Wilmington's efforts to address prevention gun violence in Wilmington, Delaware. Mayor Mike Purzycki, Chief of Staff Tandy Washington, Councilwoman Yolanda McCoy for the 6th District, and Councilmember Chris Johnson for the 7th District, and myself, we visited Newark, New Jersey last year to learn how CBPS Collective had assist with gun reduction and the violence in their city. This is a joint effort that was planned that really deals with the activity of trying to decrease shootings and murders. However, we know this is not the total answer. Schools, economics, mental health, and the list goes on. We're trying to strike at the issue that must end. There is no one answer to this epidemic. Number one, we will allow CBSP Collective to present their presentation and advise what phase 2 will be. Number two, we will allow any questions from council members and the public after Brother Kills Group finishes. Number three, this special meeting will not exceed past 6:30 due to our former council member Rashima Dixon's tributes that will take place at 6:30, dedication of Play Streets, and I think that's on Clayton Street, 6 and Clayton, in honor, and at 7 o'clock, Richard Rawls, right across the street at Spencer Plaza. And with that being said, do we have CBPS ready to do your presentation?
We are ready. I don't know, we have a PowerPoint, is that visible?
Yes.
We submitted it. Great. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth, or evening. I'm Elizabeth Rubin, Managing Director of the Community-Based Public Safety Collective. As y'all know, you can call me E. I've got Akila and Sean, my colleagues. And first, I just want to express condolences for the loss of your colleague. That's a heavy note to start a meeting out on. So anyway, deeply sorry to hear of his transition. And most of you know us by now, but we're the National Training and Technical Assistance Organization that emerged from the Newark Community Street team that many of you came to see. And we at the Community-Based Public Safety Collective, we believe that you enhance public safety by investing in what already exists in a community, that you build up community assets. And that's what our purpose is. We're not coming to your beautiful city to do this work. We did a landscape. We were contracted to do a landscape assessment to see what's already exists and make recommendations for strengthening your public safety ecosystem, focused again on reducing homicides and shootings. So, and I apologize, I forgot to say to advance the slide. I'm looking at this picture of your beautiful city and was distracted. So again, this is our mission. Next slide, please. And we're gonna, I know the focus is on Q&A, so we'll go quickly. Next slide, if you don't mind, thank you. So we reviewed your public safety data. We looked at existing reports that others had written about the city and the public safety and your public safety problem around homicides. And we conducted a 2-day site visit and then did 58 in-depth interviews over the course of several months. And then we did 20 boots on the ground surveys where we talked to folks who are actually working in the field during intervention. And that's what informed this report. Next slide, please. Just a quick reminder that what we're focused on is violence intervention work. And so if we look at violence through a public health model, prevention would be, say, the vaccination that prevents a person from becoming ill in the first place, and which is obviously of the greatest importance, but we're focused on after a person has already become infected with an illness, how we treat that, and then how we treat the after effects of their becoming infected, that with illness, that illness in this case, that illness being violence. So we're focusing directly on people who are already infected, despite the fact that prevention is also important. Next slide, please. So what we found, I'll be honest, although every city has its own characteristics and its own culture and tradition, we almost always find the same thing, that people who are engaged in violence are those who have been impacted and harmed by multi-generational racial injustice. And you combine generations of structural violence caused by the racism that exists in this country, combined with the proliferation of guns. You have people who are isolated socially, economically, and physically, and you give easy access to guns, and we see violence problems. And that's what we saw here in Wilmington as well. And it was highlighted in many of the interviews, kind of highlighted by this quote here. Next slide, please. We spoke to, again, speaking to doing the on the ground interviews and working and talking to people who are during the work in the field. We have, I would say, the majority of violence is fueled by interpersonal conflicts between people who are highly traumatized and have untreated trauma, unresolved trauma. We're not dealing with hierarchical, very structured sort of gang wars, the way people often think. We have people harming one another as a result of interpersonal conflicts. Wilmington is a small city, and people definitely know each other, and we were told repeatedly there's no place to hide, and that often when people become injured, if they're shot, they're either re-injured or they engage in preventative violence. And this kind of the easy visibility and makes it really easy to become re-injured, to become the victim of a retaliatory shooting or a repeat victimization. And that we can talk a little bit about why victim services and emergency relocation and those kind of services are such an important thing to build out in order to address that problem. We looked at the existing initiatives. And there are several, the sort of the 4 key ones that we identified were GBI, Center for Structural Equity, YAP, and the Wilmington Community Advisory Council as organizations that are really trying to tackle the violence problem in Wilmington. Next slide, please. Assets, tremendous assets in your beautiful city. Most notably, we have a mayor, a council, and a police chief who are all committed to innovation, right? It's not this way everywhere. Some places they're just doubling down on failed strategies. We have leadership that is interested in innovating and tackling your homicide epidemic with different strategies. And of course, we can't help but mention all the beautiful people in Wilmington who love their city and are deeply committed to reducing violence. And the value of this can't be overstated. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the meat of the matter, is the recommendations on what to do next. And this is not a surprise, I don't think to anybody. We recommend a adequately funded long-term investment in community, in infrastructure and community violence work. You have existing organizations that could expand their work now, and we could build new ones. There are 5 police districts that experience the highest number of shooting incidents and shooting victims, and they're they're consistent in their numbers. And we would recommend that there's a violence intervention organization for each of those 5 designated geographic areas, and then that we build connective tissue between those organizations. So that by connective tissue, I mean there should be a coordinating body. There should be data collection and folks entering their data into a centralized system. And we might want to explore a consolidated case management system so that the work is connected, regular meetings organized by a coordinating body, so that the intervention organizations are in constant communication, they're strategizing, working with other stakeholders, and coming together on a regular and thoughtful basis to address the violence. Next slide, please. Nikhila, and Sean, if y'all can jump in a little bit here. It's Friday, I'm starting to run out of steam. But so we recommended a 3-year investment in these 5 and we didn't identify the 5 organizations. We recommend putting it out. We're putting it out for RFP, and but that they be given 3 years of funding so that they can kind of build up their organizations without fear of their money running out at the end of the year. That do engage in staffing. Building violence intervention infrastructure is not like an overnight fix, right? You have to build and invest in the strength of these organizations to do the work for the long term. And we would think absolutely no less than $100,000 per organization per year. That's a low end, I think. And if you go to the next slide, I think it goes into some more detail there. So these are very bare bones staffing for a city of Wilmington's population. Akila, do you wanna pop in? Thanks.
Just in terms of comparable cities, you have a city like Trenton, New Jersey, where we're also supporting them in building out their community-based public safety initiative. I think the population of Wilmington is a little over 70,000, and Trenton is about a little over 80,000. And so we were recommending that, you want to have at least like kind of 2 hospital-based violence intervention specialists. The hospitals is a place where everybody goes when they're harmed. Teachable moments. It's an opportunity, a teachable, transformative moment, right? Because in many cases, when that individual is is harmed and they get ready to transition to the hospital, we know that there's a pretty high threshold in terms of arrest and prosecution. So law enforcement is not always able to make an arrest immediately. So having those hospital-based violence intervention specialists connected with your street outreach workers and mediators helps to prevent retaliatory violence. So, we were recommending 5 outreach workers, 5 mediators. You need case managers to be able to provide, the continuity of services, family case managers, because, when folks are harmed, there's a ripple impact. It impacts the entire family. It impacts the entire community. Victims advocates, as you all know, that many Black folks and brown folks in community don't identify as victims. And so therefore it's difficult for them to navigate, the systems of victim services. So having residents in communities who are trained as victims advocates, who understand how to be able to help them to, file police reports, to work with the prosecutor's office in order to navigate the system all the way to payout. Less than 20%, basically the national study says that less than 20% of folks in community really know how to access victim services. So this becomes an extremely important, tool in terms of supporting your ecosystem for safety. And also, we're looking at about 4 community violence intervention supervisors. Managing, trauma, ties staff, because many of your credible messengers that come to this work, they are the demographics that they serve. And so, there has to be a workforce development system that's developed internally within organizations so that, and supervision so that you can make sure that, services are being provided, services are being documented, and that everybody is being informed about kind of what's happening, right? And so again, we're recommending a multi-year investment in these community-based organizations so that we actually build their capacity, and then also we kind of coordinate, amongst them the continuity of services. Next slide. All right, and just to talk more details, because we wanted this more to be a dialogue than us kind of, talking at you. We'd love to be able to respond to questions, comments, and concerns. Some of the next steps that we were imagining in terms of you all identifying, the 5 organizations through the RFP process, and the collective coming in, providing that direct training and technical assistance, services to organizations to help them to, develop, and re-engineer their strategies, help them with fund development and diversifying their funding base, but also making sure that they're connected to, the city's overall coordinated strategy around reducing violence and crime in the city.
Akilah, I just wanted to add before we go to Q&A, we've had many conversations with y'all, and we're acutely aware that there is an immediate crisis, right? That you all as leaders want to respond to this moment. And of course, your police department is your first line of defense. However, you do have 3 trained, functioning violence intervention organizations, and for an immediate like tomorrow response, you may want to consider just investing in expanding their infrastructure and their capacity while we do longer term build out to augment those with new organizations that maybe need a little bit more capacity building to be able to manage public dollars, to be able to, do the organizational operations that you need in order to do violence intervention. So just wanted to add that. That's at the end of the report.
Tanya, I see that your hand is up.
Thank you. Yeah, so you basically hit on what I was going to ask you guys to dig a little deeper into, because I know you've talked to a number of organizations, but I wanted you to actually communicate what you found in terms of their capacity to retain data analytics. And also you just spoke to it, their ability to seek other grant funding to to make sure that they have continued financial support, and just, a whole, another conversation around the fiscal management around the existing organization. So that's what I wanted you to touch on. And so I think you did a little bit, but yeah, it's very important that people understand as we move to the next step, that those organizations have to receive that training that's critical. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat this vicious cycle.
Yeah, so we have there are the 3 organizations that again are already doing, and we tier organizations. So if you're going to tier them, they're doing violence intervention. They have training, and they have organizational infrastructure, and those were YAP, Center for Structural Equity, and GVI. And then I think that there are other intervention organizations in the city that are more like individuals and a couple folks together that need more intensive support and coaching in order to be able to again receive and manage dollars, right? They need, and that's what we do all around the country. That's very normal to find that, and like our organization was that at that time, and we've built those organizations up. So I think you have 3 that are really ready to go now and could use a boost, but I think there's more in the field that could be cultivated so that you can fill in all address all 5 primary hotspots. And Tanny, please ask specific questions. I don't know if we're covering what you wanted us to get in.
Okay. Thank you, E and Akil, for the presentation. We have Marshall Bass-Knight that's going to say a few words.
Yeah, no, I just had a question. I mean, just more so for clarifying. For the 3 existing organizations that you mentioned, one of the key things that was mentioned was about training. So with, before any funds were to go out, I think it talked about having a memorandum of agreement as well as requiring training. Can you just, confirm that, please?
Yeah, we definitely heard in interviews that the interventionists, and they said this themselves, that although YAP is PCITI trained, but that they would benefit from additional intervention training. We also suggested, and I'm just looking at the page so that I can refer to, but we suggested that there be an MOU that requires, that is really a condition of receiving city funds, that outlines roles, areas of collaboration, and under other logistical considerations. And if the city were to fund their work, you can dictate what has rules of operation, right? And so they should have to work together. They should have to coordinate. There should be standing meetings that they participate in. And so, we recommend that would all be included, as well as engaging in additional training. That, look, teams should be trained at a minimum twice a year. It's a never-ending process. It's not like you get trained once and you're done. So, definitely, biannual trainings for all those organizations. Akila,
I just wanted to add that traditionally, in terms of the practitioners who do this work on the ground, organizations, tend to turn over their staff like 2 or 3 times in 1 year, in order to kind of find the right individuals. This work is extremely difficult and challenging. Again, hiring credible messengers from the community. People bring their trauma, into this work. But they also bring significant relationships, because this is a relationship-based approach. I mean, as we said, that we kind of work through the public health lens, and that, we believe that those who are closest in proximity to the issue have to be given the skills, the tools, and the resources to do the intervention, the prevention, and the treatment. In terms of addressing the violence. And so we like to think that not only is it important that we do like conflict resolution, mediation, and de-escalation strategy training, but we also provide training around healing support for the team, so that they can address their own trauma. as they engage to work in the field. Councilwoman Gray?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's been very thorough. But I just wanted to express how important I think administrative training is. It will allow them to qualify for grants, and also maybe we can get benchmarks and get some results. That's always been one of my concerns with community programs, is we never know how well they're doing. I mean, they could be doing fantastic, but we don't have any results or any documentation of that. So I think the training is really an integral part of this process.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Yeah, and it takes organizations a while till they can produce results, right, or document them, because they are, especially when you're doing violence intervention work, you're dealing with crises every day, right? You're a first responder, you're constantly responding, and it can be really challenging to build those structures like data management and case management tracking systems and all that to start as, you know, documenting everything you're doing. Also, just fiscal operations. I mean, I know this is a struggle for me, right? When I've run an organization, been in organizational leadership, it's like getting your finances in order so you can make your payroll, so you can do, you know, it's a lot, and people need coaching, they need support, and you all are fortunate. You do have 3 organizations that have really strong organizational infrastructure. We didn't get super under the hood with them, but we got under there enough. And so then you would cultivate over time another class, that like an emerging class, right? That is gonna over time ideally catch up with them. We go through this process, and actually we're doing it again in Newark right now, right? Where we're there's organizations that are operating at a pretty high level, and they're getting one type of training that's like their field training, and then there's emerging organizations that are getting more training on like their finances and things like that. Akilah, you want to weigh in?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that in phase 2, in a phase 2, approach to doing this work, one of the things that we do is we do a fiscal and programmatic assessment, you know, each one of the organizations that we're working with. And so we look at their finances. We also look at their programmatic infrastructure. We talk with them about re-engineering some of the programs that's necessary, helping them to put protocols and systems in place in terms of, data collection, data management, all of the things that he shared. And it's a really, comprehensive approach, right? One of the things that we like to do as a part of that TTA process with the organizations is do peer exchanges. Just yesterday, we hosted Baton Rouge, a city of Baton Rouge in Newark. And this was their practitioners, their program administrators, to come and look and meet with their counterparts, in a different city who does similar work, so that they can actually exchange ideas and best practices. So, one of the things that we would do as a part of this process, in phase 2, is to bring, those key organizations to Newark, to Philly, to Baltimore, to DC, because in all of those different cities, we have respective organizations that are doing community violence intervention on the ground at varying levels. And, it's always great, when you can have a peer exchange and they can learn from each other.
Thank you, Brother Akilah, but please allow me to call on the council members on this end. No problem. Next, we have Council Member Chris Johnson has a question.
Yes. First off, thank you very much, Ian, Akilah. It was, thank you for everything you've done in terms of working with us, inviting us. I was part of the team that went up to New Jersey, and I'm really looking forward to this partnership. Now, I guess this kind of big question, I just think, like, if I wasn't on council and just looking at this in the living room, is that what separates what Newark did versus what other cities have done? Because other cities have been doing intervention work probably for 5, 10 more years, and they failed. If you look at like Baltimore and Philadelphia, and I'm actually from Philadelphia originally, so I know the challenges that city has faced. DC, what is it that Newark did that was different? I guess that's the most direct question, like how did that success, really help you in figuring this out?
I'd like to think of, to say it like this, that you have to, safety is a shared strategy, and it starts with the leadership in the city. And so Newark was fortunate to have a mayor who really believed and understood, what community-based public safety is and what it does. I've known Mayor Baraka for over 25 years. We've worked on the ground between his city and LA, in multiple cities across the country. So before he became mayor, he understood, that law enforcement as a single ubiquitous institution couldn't, be responsible for all of the safety that happened in the city. That again, safety is a shared strategy. And so when he came in office, the first thing he did was to launch the Safer Newark Council, in which he actually facilitated and coordinated. He brought together all of the key, public safety infrastructure in the city, community-based organization, faith, academia, law enforcement, and we met in the room every single week. And we talked about, our collective strategy. And he made a significant investment in his community-based infrastructure. And also provided the political cover, because as you can imagine, it's not always a great relationship between some of the activists in the community and law enforcement. And so that relationship needs to be massaged. And in many cases, folks have to learn how to respect each other in the respective field and also understand each other's respective lanes. Although we have the same goal in terms of reducing violence and crime in the city, the approach that we take is totally different. For example, in terms of community-based public safety or a community violence intervention strategy, there's a one-way intelligence sharing. Law enforcement primarily shares intelligence with the practitioners and the high-risk interventionists in the field. And the practitioners don't necessarily share intel with them because it could cost them their credibility. It can also cost them their lives in many cases, like literally. And so understanding like kind of these types of dynamics makes it extremely, important, right? We had, the successes that we had was because we started this work and most folks started seeing the successes of it like 3 years later, right? Because this thing does not happen overnight. We were fortunate that we had individuals like myself who've been doing community-based public safety for almost 30 years. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I was able to come to the city and help to re-engineer their existing infrastructure and strategy, and then support it with enhanced like kind of funding, strategic relationships, and those things are all critical. And I think that, the city of Wilmington, you all have that type of infrastructure. So it's about kind of coordinating the strategy. We were also instrumental in being able to engage our philanthropic community. Philanthropy, kind of seeds innovation, right? And we see like kind of, the public sector or government provides that long-term kind of sustainable funding. So one of the things that we would be kind of working with the organizations on the ground as well as the city with is to identify, some philanthropic partners to come in and provide some of that innovative support. Coordinating this strategy is challenging, right? And coordination costs because, everybody is pretty much understaffed and it requires just a lot of time and a lot of conversation. And so we want to make sure that there's adequate resources to help to fund the coordination and the conversation that has to take place. And I would say that has been the real success of Newark, is that Baraka was like, hey, coalitions are great. He was like, but collaboration with active MOUs. And he was like, and even in terms of like where some of our organizations didn't have a lot of overlap. He was like, hey, maybe the only thing that you do together is the community walk, because community walks became a core strategy. Every time violence happened in the community, together we got out and we were walking, utilizing our protocol, taking services directly to residents, talking to folks door to door, signing them up, enrolling them into the case management system, and showing, and utilizing data to consistently inform the strategy. That was one of the roles that Rutgers played, in our relationship. They held a lot of the data, for us and provided it to us and told us, hey, here are the hot spots, that are happening in the city, so that we could better, coordinate our strategy. I think that those were some of the core elements that makes Newark a success. Yeah.
Thank you.
And E?
Yeah, just a couple things to answer that question, Councilman Johnson, is that I think it's important to recognize that in a lot of cities, first of all, you're talking about big cities with big violence problems, right? And that if we fund an intervention organization, and this happens over and over again, we might fund an intervention organization with a couple people in one discrete neighborhood, and then hold them responsible for addressing violence throughout the whole city, right? And that's often very purposeful to hold people to unreasonable standards, because it kind of discredits the work, right? So that's one thing that we see over and over again in other places. Also, that the plug gets pulled too early, right? We ask organizations, and this happened to us in Newark. We didn't even have uniforms, and they were asking us, well, why haven't you stopped this homicide? Why didn't you stop that homicide this weekend? And we're like, we don't even have an office yet. We don't have anything. Like, you cannot ask. So that happens a lot. And then people get jumpy and antsy, and they're like, okay, it's not working. And they pull the plug. So that's part of why we recommended a 3-year investment in each organization, to really give them time to build their structure, to start working, to start tracking their results. Like, you're not going to get something that starts turning things around immediately. And also, a lot of organizations are funded to fail, right? So they get, kind of peanuts. And because people are so passionate about the work, because it's usually their community, they'll accept it. They'll say, yes, I'm gonna, sure, I'm gonna take this $5,000 you gave me, and I'm gonna promise to reduce violence. And we all know they're gonna fail. And so that's why it has to be like a meaningful investment that actually supports an organizational operations.
Okay, excuse me.
And then, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I just
No, I have,
want to talk about
No, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I have Councilmember Al Mill that has a question. I want to squeeze in some of the questions. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Al. I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you and appreciate everything that's being said. Thank you and appreciate everything that's being said. E, you said during one of your statements that it would be organized by a coordinating body. And I was just trying to see, is that city-led or city overseen, and how does that look in Newark? And question 2, how long is phase 2?
Yeah, so in Newark, we had a coordinating body originally that was external. There with the philanthropy funded the Safer Newark Council to coordinate the public safety strategy, and I ran it, and that is one way that you can do it. The city can do it. We see in a lot of places like LA, the GRID office coordinates all the organizations. We looked when we asked around when we did the interviews, and the rec department was recommended as like a vehicle for this work. A couple people made that recommendation, said that was a city office that could manage the funding, kind of understood intervention, and could convene people. So that could be another option. You could contract out for it. You could do it internally. And if you remember the second question.
Yes, just in terms of phase 2, how long is phase 2? We'd like to tether TTA to the the funding for the organizations over the 3 years, right? Because they're going to need support throughout that entire process, right? And so I think that you all should tether. Excuse me. We should tether TTA to the life of the funding for the organizations, because they're going to continue to need support throughout the process.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, I have Councilwoman Yolanda McCoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is actually more so about the MOUs and how you, I guess, seeing them constructed. whether or not the funding, will it be maybe restricted to the capacity building, I guess? Or is it able to, or are different organizations able to use it to leverage for, you know, to maybe hire someone to make certain that they have additional funding? I just wanted to see, you know, how you've seen the MOUs constructed, you know, in different organizations. I'm sorry, did you,
Yeah,
okay.
Councilwoman, can you re-answer ask the
Okay,
question?
yeah, no problem. Here, I just want to make sure you can hear me. So I was talking about the MOUs. So as we are looking at the funds that our organization, these 5 organizations will receive, you know, we realize it's only 3 years of funding. So what I see is using the funding to, you know, as leverage to maybe just hire an additional person so that they can actually find, plan, or whatever it is that first year, rather than trying to do programming or whatever. Like, we don't want to see them fail by trying to stretch money thin, but you find a way to leverage the first amounts of money to maybe hire another person or so in order to continue to find grant funding, and also to make certain that they're able to keep building capacity rather than relying on the 300,000 every year until like they're basically forced, you know, in a corner.
Yes, the purpose of multi-year funding is to allow folks an opportunity to be able to you know, to build capacity and to have, because, you know, whether you're going after philanthropic dollars or governmental dollars or corporate, you know, dollars, most folks want to fund things that are already in existence as opposed to things that are just, you know, being, you know, created, right? And so one of our philosophies around funding is that, you know, you keep 10 irons in the fire at all times, right? And so, you know, a part of the TTA that we'll provide to organizations so that they don't take money away from the actual direct services, right? Because I like to think about, you know, community-based public safety as twofold. You know, there's the business and then there's the direct service provision, right? And so we want to make sure that that fund organizations are adequately funded in terms of the administrative side of it, but also that they're funding, you know, their boots on the ground, their practitioners in the field, that they're being funded well to do the work, right? And have all of the type, you know, support, you know, for them to be able to be effective at doing their work. So the TTA will essentially be, the TTA provider will eventually support them in developing like those strategies around fund development, and can bring in like kind of, you know, grant writers as subject matter experts, you know, to help organizations if they don't have one, to also help to identify additional funding sources. As you all know, the Biden administration is making an unprecedented investment in community-based public safety. This year alone, the Safer Communities Act is putting $250 million over the next 5 years, so about $50 million over the next 5 years that's going to come out through DOJ. And then 24, you know, the president is going to be launching the Safe Americas Act, which has $5.2 billion over the next 8 years for community violence intervention or community-based public safety work. And so there are tremendous opportunities. And now philanthropy is also gearing up. Traditionally, they have primarily funded like kind of criminal justice reform as kind of a core strategy around reducing violence in communities. But now that that they've funded, you know, the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaborative, one of the initiatives that I currently manage for the White House, and that the collective is a core, you know, partner as one of the 5 national TTA providers in, you know, there is you know, like a lot of like kind of resources that's coming through this work through philanthropy now, because they're now being educated about their role as one of the seeders of innovation in terms of CVI, as the federal government and municipal government is looking at providing that long-term sustainable support.
Thank
And so MOUs, you know, are critical in that process, you know, right?
Thank you so much. Next, we have Councilwoman Fields, and then we're going to take Councilwoman Darby, and then we have some individuals on the line who will be working in the field, so we want to get them to we would like them to ask their questions, because they're going to be the ones really running this. Councilwoman Fields?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for being present today and presenting this. I just have a couple of questions, and I'm going to go back a little bit. You spoke about the training, and I wanted to know, is the training going to be certified for these individuals? Yes?
The training is the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute programs the best community-based public safety training in the country. Dr. Akil Bashir is renowned across the country for his work. He's provided like the core training to 13 of the 60 victims that we're working in with the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaborative, and it's a certified training. You know, so you get level 1, level 2 certifications in conflict resolution, mediation, and de-escalation strategies. So this certification follows the practitioners.
Okay, and how many CEUs do they have to have? Like, after they get it, maybe 1 or 2 years, do they have to go back and get recertified again to stay current?
Yes, so training is ongoing. I mean, we believe in training. You can never have enough of it. We traditionally do trainings twice a year, level 1 and level 2 certifications. And this is repeated every year because one of the things that happens in the field is that you traditionally turn over your staff like 2 or 3 times. And it's not a deficit, you know, in terms of it, because the more people who are trained in the community, you know, these folks become sentinels. And they become a part of your public safety infrastructure in the city because, you know, they now understand, you know, the protocols around conflict resolution and mediation. One of the things that just real quick that we discovered in Newark when we were doing the work, the Safer Newark Council put out a report and discovered that 62% of the homicides in the city started as interpersonal conflicts, you know? And so making sure that residents are trained in conflict resolution and mediation and de-escalation strategies, be able to stand in the gap, you know, helps to you know, one, prevent violence from happening, and then also helps to intervene in retaliatory violence, you know, because now you have more folks who are trained. And so we consistently train.
Okay, my next question. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Madam Chair, I got to follow up. My next question is, how much do you estimate it's going to cost for these 27 staff members that you recommended, the additional specific recommendations? So like, how much do you estimate that's going to cost?
Well, one of the things that we were recommending, you know, is that each one of the organizations have a minimum of $100,000 because we know that this work is expensive, right? And so it's really, you know, up to you all to determine like the type of investment that you want to make in these community-based organizations. You know, we're giving kind of like a baseline, you know, of investment. And because each one of the organizations does something a little different, all of their strategies are not the same. And so working with them, you know, through phase 2, you know, basically doing the programmatic and fiscal assessment, doing the tiered TTA strategy, which will be a living document that each organization will hold, you know, doing that process, you know, we'll be able to come back and say, hey, here's what, you know, just in general, what we've discovered, you know, both fiscally and programmatically exists within these organizations. And here is what we think, you know, in terms of like funding level, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Next, we have a question from Councilwoman Darby, and then we're going to go with, I think, Wolfie and Hanifa, President Hanifa Shabazz, and there's some people here from the public who would like to speak, ask some questions. Thank you. Next, Councilwoman Darby.
Yes, no, thank you guys for coming and doing this report and this presentation. I love what the mayor is doing over in Newark. I do have a few questions. So I know it's supposed to be $100,000 for 3 years for 5 organizations is the recommendation. And I know that currently right now we're using ARPA funds, which we have up to $8 million. But I know I just wanted to confirm the day we have to use the money by, like the month of the year.
No. No certain. Trying to do this, we're trying to launch this out as soon as possible.
No, what's the date we have to spend the ARPA funds by? There's an expiration date to use an ARPA
Oh,
fund.
25, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. 2025.
2025. Okay, that's what I wanted to confirm. And so we have to be mindful of that timeline. That's just throwing that out there. And then also, what I love, which I believe, I think grant funding is great, but the city in Newark also made an investment into violence and intervention. And they actually have a part of their budget out of the public safety that they use towards their violence prevention. So I have a question. What would you recommend for the city of Wilmington to do to make a permanent investment in gun violence instead of our temporary funds that we're using, so that we are doing grant funds, but the city also has an investment in gun violence reduction? And if you could talk about the percentage that you use from your public safety so that it's an ongoing yearly thing that these programs are funded and your city actually took a real investment in it, because this is ongoing. It's not, it's past 3 years.
Councilwoman, I think I agree. Like, it needs to be, should have a consistent, dedicated funding source that obviously ARPA, to your point, is not. It doesn't work long-term. It's great for upfront infusion. Personally, I wouldn't presume to tell a city how they handle their budgeting. And, like, it would be y'all's decision to figure out how to allocate it. But that is what we did in Newark, was take funds from the public safety budget.
Yeah, I just also wanted to say that when we started our work, it was all with philanthropic dollars. So, it was Prudential, Victoria Foundation, MCJ, even Rutgers threw in a little money that funded the pilot, because it's a proof of concept, and it's not to say that because Newark had some community-based public safety infrastructure to start, however, again, it wasn't robust. And so, there's a lot of people to convince, right, in terms of this work, that community-based public safety as a complementary strategy for policing works. Right. And so we had to actually produce the data, to show it. Now, law enforcement actually overall kind of showed the initial data, right? Because in 2014, when we started in the city, there was 103 homicides, and after we launched, the Newark Community Street Team and the coordinated strategy, 2 years later, we had double-digit reductions in homicides in the city. Now, we followed that up with a qualitative evaluation. NCST produced a qualitative evaluation in partnership with UCLA and Rutgers to show what was the process, because it's I don't think that in 2 years or 3 years you can actually show impact, right? And sometimes people don't think that qualitative evaluation is rigor, but it is. It is rigor, because the process is just as important as the outcomes. You got to understand, the process that an individual works through and the relationships that are developed that actually give you your outcome. And so we're right now working on the quantitative evaluation to be able to show that this work is effective. In some cities all across the country, community-based public safety is evidence-based work, right? We're big advocates of participatory research, because we believe in building infrastructure and leaving that existing infrastructure in communities. And we know that in the past, sometimes evidence-based actually perpetuates structural violence in our community, right? And so, because sometimes, the people who actually inform the evidence-based data reports don't get to be in first, second, or third position in that data, and they can't follow it. And so we're we kind of, I'm getting in the weeds a little bit, but this is some of the reasons why we like to try to start to do a proof of concept, and then work with the organizations on the ground to build their individual capacity as organizations as we work collectively with the city to move those dollars. It took us 5 years to move those dollars. And a significant, time, because it was the public execution of George Floyd that created the opportunity for us to be able to actually create the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery. And it was a lot of advocacy work that we had to do to move those dollars. So, and I know I'm speaking to the choir because you all, you know the challenges of working like kind of in government and community to be able to make those types of moves.
Thank you.
Is that it?
No, that's it. Thank you. I just wanted to say that we need to make a permanent investment, and this is temporary.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Next, we do have someone here from the public. Could you come up and ask your question and state your name, please?
Sure. Is this working?
Yes.
Great. Hi, thanks so much. I'm Tracy Murphy. I'm the executive director of the Delaware Coalition Against Gun Violence. And we are a statewide advocacy group focused on advancing policies, prevention education, and supporting the community intervention programs that are already hard at work in our city and in our state. And my question for the team, and thanks so much for hosting this event and welcoming comment, is if you could share a little bit about some of the underlying policies that are already engaged in New Jersey. We know that their gun safety laws are different than ours. And with different laws, you get different outcomes. And I'm particularly interested in hearing about the impacts of a licensing or a permitting policy, which historically can keep the flow of guns out of a city in the first place. That's sort of on the prevention side, but I'm curious to know what impact those policies have on this work. And thanks.
Thank you. Could someone answer that question?
So we do not get involved honestly, in gun policy. It is really beyond the scope of our expertise. So I just wouldn't want to veer off of what we know about. I mean, we'd be delighted to connect you to folks in New Jersey who could speak to that thoughtfully and in other places, but that's not our area of expertise.
Okay, I have one question from President Hanifa Shabazz. Somehow the phone is messed up. How do you see the framing of public safety roundtable?
Yes, the Public Safety Roundtable is an important tool as a part of the community-based public safety strategy, right? Most folks in community, you say public safety and people will say police. Public safety is a very abstract thing to residents on the ground in neighborhoods. And so a lot of our work is about pulling the public safety out of the abstract. And we like to say that, public safety is, you can't have public safety without the public, right? And so we have to educate the public on some of the policy issues and stuff that impact community. And also how they can play a strategic role in the public safety process without abdicating a lot of their responsibility to law enforcement and policing. So this is why we train. And we've also created like kind of additional programs that we'll share. One of them is the Community Sentinels program, which is a civics program that actually utilizes like systems of popular education to educate folks in the community around, the public safety dynamic. And so I think that those pieces are really important in terms of the Public Safety Roundtable. It's become one of the most important policy forums in the city in terms of helping residents have a voice in that
It also helps fill in gaps in service, right? So if you're you have just gaps in meeting folks' needs, in policy gaps, but also service delivery gaps, it can highlight those and you can hold folks accountable for filling them, which is, I think, really important and powerful when you're adopting a new public safety.
Thank you. And one more question before we let Chief of Staff, Ms. Washington, make a statement. Newark set aside 5% of their budget for the Office of Violence Prevention for a total of $12 million. We are not as big, but we did look at moving a percentage of the cities in the city for substantial funding. And also we have to remember that, as Brother Kill stated, he was working with Mayor Barack Obama. So it's also about the investment with the mayor. And he said he had a good relationship with the chief. And so you got to look at all that. So you had people who were dedicated to this violence and gun violence or violence prevention. So that's a big difference. You're talking about Obama telling Brother Kill, look, whatever you can do, we're going to give you whatever funding. I mean, I keep saying Barack. Right. Well, he knows Barack, he's saying that. And I say it all the time. But nevertheless, he was friends with the mayor, he was friends with the police, so he had someone already in the position to say, look, whatever you can do, here's the funding. So that made a big difference. Next, we have, is it Wolfie or someone on it? Chief of Staff?
Yes, this is more of a, I'm posing this question to Akila. Every city is different, but we know that the city of Wilmington does not provide social services, direct social services, and I know that this has to be a critical component of violence intervention. Given though this lies within the state, their parameters, what do you suggest how we move forward with that? Because I see that that's going to be a challenge for us. We don't control all aspects of social services and other services. So how do you advise that we deal with that?
Yeah, we definitely heard that loud and clear and tried to highlight it in the report. And I think that that's also where your public safety roundtable can really help, right? You're on the record in a public forum talking about what services you need to bring, and then I do this, I've done this a million times. Then you reach out to the responsible entity, you ask them to come and explain, like, why is this service not being delivered to these people as promised? You hold them accountable, you come back over and over again, and it improves the responsiveness of the systems that are supposed to be serving people. And that's one of your best strategies. And then also having a variety of stakeholders. But it's really that public accountability piece, because you want it in the open, and that's what gets people to show up and be responsive. So that's one of the, I think, key pieces for addressing those parts that you all are not responsible for, which is very common, right? That the city isn't actually responsible for social services.
I mentioned that because it would lead me to believe that much of the success from Newark was because they do have control over these types of services. So, just in managing expectations, how we move in that direction, I just wanted to make that a point.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it wasn't the case, right? And it rarely is that the city is providing all the services you need, and that's why, again, you have to have a coordinating body, and we recommend a public forum to discuss these things, and also for a collaborative approach, because then you can pivot as a group. Like, you know what, we are not ever going to send people there. We have to cultivate a new source to get this service, and you can do that kind of thing collaboratively. So it was not the case that we had anything to rely on in Newark. And then we also did not, even though we had a great relationship, there was no public investment in violence intervention work until very recently. So it's a really new thing.
Yeah, and just to add one other thing that one of the things that we had to establish early on, we had liaisons in each one of the municipal services, because it was very well known that people would go to social services and spend 4 hours there, and they were highly frustrated about it. And so one of the things that Baraka helped us to do was to help facilitate some of those key relationships. And so we identified folks that were directly connected, to NCST, that we could actually take our folks to, and they would service. And then, our outreach workers would also work with the participants that we would send there and tell them that, hey, that this place, it takes a little bit of time. And so we're going to need you to be a little bit more patient than usual in order to be able to access the services, because we're trying to fix some of these things, And again, philanthropic dollars are important in terms of coordination.
Thank you. Next, we have another person who would like to ask a question. Could you state your name and your question, please, sir?
How y'all doing? My name is Devon Marquis Hall, and is he going to be able to answer my question?
Well, ask your question. What's it?
Well, the question that I can ask you guys, there's 3 different organizations. I got YAP, GVI, but I didn't get the last one.
Center of Structural Equity.
Center of Structural Equity. All right. I want to, I guess, explain some things. I want to teach, I guess. I got
No, we're asking the
2
court.
minutes and 30 seconds.
Go ahead.
Here we go. I want to say rest in peace to Rashima. Tomorrow we've got Open Streets, something that started from her heart with Play Streets, and it is very troubling being here today. I watched the meeting last night. I saw how many resources are going to the police, how many grants are going to the police with no promise of community intervention. It's great that these 3 organizations are going to be awarded this funding. Mary Baraka in New Jersey is somebody not like our mayor here, and he does have a man who works with him from LA that I kind of see some comparisons in, but I think that we need a lot more help. I'll say something about boxing since I'm a fighter and I believe in fighting for good causes outside the ring. Shakur Stevenson's from Newark, New Jersey. Shakur Stevenson's 10 years younger than me, but he's got 10 more years experience in boxing than I do. And he's got world championship belts. He's got a new baby. He's got millions of dollars. He's got what inspires the youth to do what it is that he did, or try to do what it is that he's done. What we have, we do have Omar Douglas. And we got Olu Douglas and Omar's dad, Big Omar. And they work with YAP. So I'm hoping that maybe they'll do some more boxing. We'll get some more resources out of the Hicks Center. And I'm happy to be here and to hopefully guide you guys in the right direction when it comes to youth intervention and trying to get the community support that we do need. Open Streets is something that I think needs to be bigger, needs to be expanded to more places, and Rashima's heart is still alive, and I know that this community is going to be a lot better than it is today. The best is yet to come, and God bless you guys.
Thank you so much. Do we have someone on the line? Window hand up that I'm unable to see.
Councilwoman, by the way, the person from LA that he mentioned is Akila.
No, I was mentioning Greg up there.
No, he was mentioning someone else.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. We have.
I was comparing those two.
Excuse me. Thank you. Excuse me. We have Mr. Daniel Walker. Would you like to ask a question? Why we need some of your? I know you're pretty good at this, so I'm going to call you up to ask a question. He oversees a lot of these organizations. So.
Hello, hi, Daniel Walker from the Department of Health and Social Services. Many came in a capacity to just see what the report was going to entail. But I am curious, Akila and E, it's good to see you both again. Thank you for putting this together. One of the things that I saw, and Councilwoman Darby mentioned it, and Councilwoman Oliver mentioned it a bit, that was outlined in the initial report revolved around existing organizations and matching up to 75% of their operating budget. And I was wondering how much that plays into the position allocations or position outline that was presented in the PowerPoint. As you stated, a lot of these organizations are already doing some of the work, the 3 organizations you mentioned, some of which I'm thinking of Center for Structural Equity and GVI and WCAC and things like that. You're looking at hospital interventionists. And so just to get to the point, would your suggestion be for us to use, or for the city to use the funds in order to supplement the work of these organizations to build capacity. I think this is where Councilwoman McCoy was getting a little bit, to build capacity to meet those requirements for the positions as outlined in the PowerPoint? Or are you advocating or suggesting we need additional positions in order to do this work? And so is it a matter of just boosting the funding and the focus on Wilmington, or are you saying we need a completely different dedicated arm in order to do it? I just want to make sure we're clear with that.
So I think it's a both and, right? That we recommended, because an immediate investment in the 3 existing organizations, and then over the longer term to expand the pool to 5, which would, I mean, realistically would probably be those same 3, right? Plus 2, but it could shake out differently. So does that answer? And nice to see you again, Danielle. Akila, did you want?
Yeah, and no, I would add nothing else. I would say, yeah.
Okay.
And those, the staffing levels are just like to give you a sense of the scope of positions that should be available, right? We're doing victim services, we're doing intervention, we're doing case management. It's not just one thing. So that was the purpose of that, just to give you a sense of how many different roles can be filled within a single intervention organization or in complement.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Chris Johnson, Councilman Chris Johnson.
I just want to follow up on, I know we've talked a lot about the intervention work for the offender side, but I understand that you do focus a lot on victim services as well. That's what I gleaned from the report, and specifically regarding policy. And from my recollection, I think you were instrumental in making policy changes in Trenton regarding victim services. So that kind of advocacy, I know gun violence, specifically gun laws, I know you don't, that's not your focus, but in terms of advocacy at the state level for victim services, is that something that you foresee Wilmington needing to do so we can revamp how we treat those who are traumatized by violence?
Absolutely. And as you know, Councilman, I live and breathe victim services. It's my passion. So, yeah, you have a problem on the state level. I would think you're would need statute change to properly serve people. So and then this was identified in the interviews that you can't, folks. It's a struggle to get people relocated. People aren't getting counseling benefits. They're not getting support that they need after they're injured. And this is usually because on the state level, victim services they only want to serve victims that they deem sort of ideal victims, like which is a very racially and class loaded term. So we believe that you serve all victims after they're injured, and that's part of how you break the cycle of violence, and that requires state policy change that would be happy to help you with and give you some models. And hopefully you could work with other cities throughout the, other places in Delaware that are experiencing the same problems and advocate for change. And we could talk another time about how you can get law enforcement involved in this reform, because it really undermines their ability to close cases that victims comp operates the way it does. So that'd be a lengthy discussion for another day, but I strongly recommend a focus on.
Thank you. We do have one more person on the line for our last question. When do you want to put them on?
Madam Chair, do you know who's requesting? Because you don't have a hand up.
Okay, no problem. Okay, if we don't have any more questions from the public, from council members, I would like to thank organization for coming on a Friday in the evening on a beautiful day and giving us an update on this topic. And with that being said, if I have a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Has been properly moved in second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Motion carried. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Be safe, y'all. Bye.